In the early hours of 8 June 1992, on Rue du Commandant René Mouchot, beside the Le Méridien Montparnasse Hotel in Paris's 14th arrondissement, the street looks emptied of intention. Night staff smoke by the service entrance, taxis idle near the curb, and in the lobby a clerk straightens a stack of registration cards. A few hours later, newspapers will use the phrase "un crime de professionnels" to describe what happens here. One New York report will speak of PLO leadership thinned by a single act in Paris. For now, a man returns from a late dinner and pauses beside a parked car, reaching to pull the front seat forward for a friend. Across the road, two figures who have waited for hours begin to walk. There is no shout, no warning, only the dull repetition of suppressed shots and the soft closing of the hotel's glass doors behind no one. In the first days of June 1992, Atif Psaiso moves quietly through government corridors in Bonn, a Palestinian official among many visiting delegations. German intelligence references from that period place him at meetings with the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, the domestic security agency, where he discussed threats against Palestinian officials living in Europe. The archival trail offers practical details rather than sentiment. A notation that he arranged for a white Jeep Renegade, imported from the United States to Germany. A record that he collected the vehicle with the intention of driving it to Paris, then onward to Tunis, as a surprise for his wife Dima and their 3 children. The same reports describe him as the PLO's liaison to foreign intelligence services, a man who had shifted from clandestine operations into a role meant to protect lives rather than take them. In reconstructed scenes, the Jeep's door becomes the first recurring motif, the heavy clunk as he closes it outside a Bonn hotel, a practical sound echoing down a side street. The record does not say how he felt about this small symbol of prosperity, only that he planned to show it to his family. The Jeep appears in the paperwork. The feelings are left blank. Elsewhere in Europe, Mossad files still carry his name from the so-called Golda list of Palestinians marked after the Munich massacre in 1972. Some accounts suggest his name was later crossed out, then reinstated under the direction of Mossad chief Shabtai Shavat. The documents do not record the moment of that reversal, only its eventual consequence. The next entry in the file is not Tunis, but Paris. On Sunday, 7 June 1992, the white Jeep Renegade leaves Germany and heads southwest. Its route later inferred from fuel receipts and border crossing notes that appear in investigative reporting. It is Besso at the wheel, a senior Fatah figure, born on 23 August 1948, veteran of the Beirut years, now tasked with speaking to European intelligence services about Palestinian security rather than spectacular attacks. A documentary camera might stay outside the car in long shots. Motorway signs sliding past, late spring light over the Franco-German border, the Jeep's door opening and closing at service areas. The confirmed facts are sparse but solid. His departure from Bonn, his arrival in Paris later that day, his intention to continue to Marseille, and then by ferry to Tunis. Even this plan appears only in later reconstructions. Never in any surviving words of his own. On the other side of this journey, an Israeli surveillance team is already in motion. Open-source accounts describe it as a Caesarea unit, the Mossad division responsible for covert operations abroad, tracking him from his arrival in Berlin 3 days earlier and adapting to his last-minute decisions. Their travel arrangements, passports, and hotel names are not publicly documented. Only their presence is inferred from converging accounts by journalists and former operatives. The Jeep's closing door is heard again as he parks near Montparnasse, now in the 14th arrondissement of Paris. The sound is the same, but the context has changed. On French soil, Palestinian security, European intelligence, and Israeli fears of PLO legitimacy all converge around one man's movements. By nightfall, his new hotel will appear in 2 very different sets of records. By the evening of 7 June 1992, Atif Psaiso has checked into Le Méridien Montparnasse at 19 Rue du Commandant René Mouchot, a high-rise hotel near the Gare Montparnasse, whose guest lists already include years of PLO delegations. The PLO reportedly kept a room there year-round. Staff were accustomed to discreet arrivals and late-night conversations in Arabic. He books at the last minute, forcing the Caesarea team to adjust their plan. One English-language reconstruction notes that his sudden change of hotel obliged the operatives to make rapid adjustments, an operational detail revealing how fluid such missions can be. Elsewhere in the city, in a rented apartment in the 11th arrondissement, Mossad director Shabtai Shavit is said to have been supervising the operation, relying on field reports and surveillance updates. Inside the lobby that night, the documentary shows only what the sources confirm. Besso notices a suspicious figure watching him, enough to make him request protection from French domestic intelligence, the Direction de la Surveillance du Territoire. The answer, recorded in multiple accounts, is bureaucratically calm. Guards can be provided the following morning. He accepts the delay. The file shows no protest, only the scheduled 10 a.m. meeting with French counter-espionage officers noted in planners and later news reports. The Jeep remains parked, door locked, key in his pocket. The small domestic motive, a car for his family, coexists with the larger invisible list his name is on. In the paperwork, these are routine movements of a liaison officer. In another set of files, they are the final steps of a long-running manhunt. The next documents in this story look backward, to Munich. Although the main narrative stays in 1992, the documentary briefly steps back. In voiceover, the narrator anchors Besso's earlier life with what is reliably recorded. He was born on 23 August 1948 into a prominent Gaza family, joined Fatah as a young man after studies in Beirut, and became close to senior security figures such as Ali Hassan Salameh and Abu Iyad. Sources disagree on the exact contours of his operational past. Israeli officials, including military intelligence chief Uri Sagui, have claimed he was involved in the 1972 Munich Olympic attack. Palestinian sources deny this, and researchers note that direct documentary proof of his role has never been produced publicly. What appears consistent is that he belonged to the Black September milieu, from which some of the Munich perpetrators were drawn, and that his name was placed on the so-called Golda list, authorizing retribution. The context bridge is short and factual. After Munich, Israel launched Operation Wrath of God, a campaign of targeted killings against suspected Black September and PLO operatives across Europe and the Middle East, including operations in Paris against Mahmoud Hamshari and Mohammed Boudia. These assassinations mixed precise intelligence with errors and misidentifications, a pattern later documented by journalists and historians of Israeli covert action. By the late 1982, some Mossad officers reportedly argued that Psaiso no longer belonged on that list, that his role had shifted from operations to diplomatic security, and that his removal had been approved by former Mossad director Nahum Admoni. Yet later accounts suggest Shabtai Shavit reinstated him, convinced of his Munich involvement and worried about his growing ties with Western services. By 1992, he is both a father planning a surprise car for his children and a name still marked in red ink somewhere in an Israeli file. By early 1992, most official records place Atif Psaiso in Tunis, then the PLO's headquarters in exile, traveling regularly to European capitals in his capacity as head of external security and liaison with Western intelligence. He dealt with the BFV in Bonn on threats against Palestinian officials in Germany, with the French DST on security for PLO representatives in Paris, and with other agencies whose names appear in scattered press reports and memoirs. For Western services, he was a channel into information on groups hostile both to Israel and to Europe, intelligence on potential plots in European cities, on networks moving weapons or planning hijackings. For the PLO, his role supported a broader diplomatic aim: to demonstrate that the organization could be a responsible partner in counterterrorism, not merely a subject of it. One later summary of the case notes that his work strengthened the PLO's credentials with Western governments. In one of those same sources, CIA officer Robert Baer recalls that he was supposed to meet Psyso in Paris shortly after the assassination, and that he understood the killing as a message aimed not at Munich's past but at the PLO's growing acceptance by Western intelligence communities. His testimony becomes another archival voice in the documentary. Not definitive but significant, an American official reading the operation as punishment for cooperation with the West. Visually, a documentary can juxtapose redacted intelligence cables with mundane images: a hotel coffee cup, the Jeep parking ticket, the revolving glass door of Le Méridien. The contrast underlines the central tension. A man moving through a civilian landscape whose significance is visible only on classified paper. While he strengthens those ties, another service reads each of his meetings as a threat. The perspective shifts to Mossad, staying within what is publicly documented. By the early 1992, the Caesarea Unit, a special operations branch under Mossad authority, is the institutional heir of the teams that carried out Operation Wrath of God in the 1970s. Its mission is to conduct covert actions abroad, including targeted killings of individuals assessed as threats to Israeli security. Open sources attribute the Psyso operation to Caesarea and state that it was directed personally by Mossad head Shabtai Shavit from a safe house in Paris's 11th arrondissement. The operatives on the ground are identified in one reconstruction only by the nicknames Tom and Frank, described as appearing like skinheads, a visual detail that speaks to the anonymity such missions require. A documentary can introduce the broader psychological context without inventing inner monologues. Memoirs and histories of Mossad's targeted killings describe the cumulative weight on operatives: the long surveillance, the domestic covers, the quiet flights home, and sometimes the doubts that emerge years later about particular targets. None of these accounts name Tom or Frank, but they establish an institutional atmosphere, one in which retribution, deterrence, and political messaging blur. In June 1992, Israeli elections are weeks away. Yitzhak Shamir's government is under pressure. Yitzhak Rabin's Labor Party is rising. Some analyses argue that eliminating a figure associated, rightly or wrongly, with Munich could demonstrate toughness. Others see a strike aimed at the PLO's budding legitimacy in Western capitals. The records do not settle the argument. They simply fix the date. Whether he is seen as terrorist or interlocutor depends on which archive one reads. But both archives converge on the same Paris pavement. On 7 June, he drives his new Jeep into that convergence. The operational phase, as reconstructed from multiple sources, begins in Germany. An Israeli surveillance team tracks Psyso's movements in Berlin and Bonn, then follows his newly purchased Jeep Renegade as he drives toward France. Surveillance logs themselves are not public, but journalists have summarized them. Hotel lobbies watched, license plate noted, departure time recorded. In this documentary's approach, the emphasis falls on method rather than spectacle. A narrator can describe the likely pattern based on established tradecraft. One car following at distance, another waiting at a border crossing, a third positioned at the destination. Where sources fall silent, the voiceover explicitly acknowledges it. Open files do not reveal the number of watchers, only that Psyso was under continuous observation in the days before his death. Parallel to these movements, French domestic intelligence is monitoring other Palestinian and Middle Eastern networks on its soil. Later DST memoranda, referenced in French reporting on the case, note Psyso's flights, his car, his habitual hotels. None of those notes, however, prevent what happens next. As the Jeep's door closes once more in the underground parking of Le Méridien, the motif now carries different weight. For the driver, it remains a step toward a new status symbol and a meeting with French partners. For the surveillance team, it is confirmation that the target has entered the chosen killing ground, a busy but controllable hotel frontage in Montparnasse. On the first night in Paris, suspicion flickers briefly in the hotel lobby. Then, is postponed until morning. The evening of 7 June 1992 inches, Paris is documented only in fragments. Several accounts agree that after checking in at Le Méridien, Psyso notices a man in the lobby whose interest feels wrong, and that he telephones French authorities to request protection. The DST acknowledges the concern but states that no bodyguards can be assigned before the following day. A documentary does not need to invent the conversation. It can quote the substance reported later, that protection will be available tomorrow morning. Relayed in press and book-length reconstructions, becomes a time marker, a line separating the world in which he will walk into his meeting with French counter-espionage from another world in which he will not. Across town, the safe house in the 11th arrondissement is active. Shabtai Shavat, according to later sources, follows updates on the target's hotel choice and movements. The shooters and their support network recalibrate routes and timings around the Montparnasse location. The weapon prepared for the operation is described in some accounts as a .22 Beretta with a cloth brass catcher, in others as a 9mm pistol with suppressor. Even material details diverge in the record. The narrative can make that discrepancy part of the story. Police and journalists agree on the pattern of shots and the professionalism of the killers, but not always on caliber. What is constant is the intention: to leave no casings, no fingerprints, no trace beyond the body. The following night, the same lobby will see him walk in alive and leave only as a case file. On the evening of 8 June 1992, Atef Psyso dines at one of the Hippopotamus chain restaurants in Paris, together with two Lebanese acquaintances. One, a bodyguard, the other, a woman friend. This detail appears repeatedly in journalistic reconstructions and in English-language biographical entries about him. The conversation at the table is not recorded. What is documented, more significantly, is the fact that the earlier fear of being followed seems to recede. The suspicious lobby figure, which had prompted a call to the DST the previous night, is no longer treated as a pressing threat. According to sources, the party finishes dinner late, at around 2 a.m. A documentary can frame this scene in quiet, domestic tones. Plates cleared, the scrape of chairs, the bill signed. Outside, Montparnasse remains partially lit. Train lines, late buses, the shadow of the Tour, Montparnasse. But the streets around Le Méridien are relatively empty. The Jeep motif appears again, only in narration. His own car remains parked. Tonight, he is a passenger in another vehicle, pulling up to the hotel. Meanwhile, within walking distance, the operatives dubbed Tom and Frank in one account wait in a position that allows them to approach the hotel entrance on foot. Their clothes are described in French sources as jogging suits and sneakers. In English sources, they are said to resemble skinheads, an aesthetic designed to be both anonymous and unmemorable. At 2 a.m., 3 car doors open in front of Le Méridien. 2 more footsteps are already on their way. Shortly after 2 a.m., on 8 June 1992, in front of Le Méridien Montparnasse, the events that anchor this documentary unfold in seconds. As the car carrying Psyso and his companion stops near the hotel entrance, he steps out on the passenger side and bends to pull the front seat forward so the rear passenger can exit, a gesture explicitly described in several reconstructions. At that moment, 2 men close in. One pushes him against the bonnet of the car. The other fires at close range with a suppressed handgun, described as delivering 2 or 3 shots to the head. The shooters carry a brass catcher, a cloth device to collect spent casings, leaving the pavement free of ballistic evidence. Witnesses later tell police that the attackers do not run but walk quickly away toward Rue Vendôme, where a getaway car is waiting. Within approximately 2 hours, according to journalistic accounts, the entire team has left France. French police and media describe the scene with 2 phrases that recur in the archive: tué sur le coup, killed instantly, and un crime de professionnels, the hotel frontage, documented elsewhere in architectural and tourist literature, becomes a fixed point. The same revolving doors, the same street number, now etched into political history. In the documentary, this chapter does not linger on blood or impact. The sound design focuses instead on what remains: the sudden absence of the man who was about to hold an official meeting a few hours later. The Jeep still parked, the camera panning up the silent facade of the hotel. In operational terms, the mission is a success. But the files that follow are written by police, judges, and diplomats, not by the assassins. By morning, competing claims will fight for ownership of the killing. The morning of 8 June, 1992. Paris wakes to headlines about the assassination of a senior PLO security official in front of a Montparnasse hotel. Wire services and major newspapers report that Atif Psizo, described as acting head of PLO security, was shot by 2 gunmen as he got out of a car, and that he died at the scene. Initial reactions are fragmented. The PLO and Palestinian officials quickly accuse Israel, pointing to the method and to the long history of Mossad operations against their cadres in Europe. Israeli officials issue sharp denials. A spokesman for Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir's office calls the idea of Mossad involvement totally and completely ridiculous. Into this noise enters another actor: the Abu Nidal organization, formerly known as Fatah Revolutionary Council, which claims responsibility for the killing. French newspaper reports on this claim note that the group presents the assassination as punishment for Psizo's supposed betrayal. Many analysts, however, continue to see Mossad as the most plausible culprit, given the target's history and the operation's style. French police and the DST, according to subsequent French reporting, privately attribute the killing to Mossad almost immediately, even as the official investigation proceeds through more cautious language. Their early notes emphasize the professional preparation, the absence of shell casings, and the political sensitivity of a foreign service carrying out an execution in the capital. A documentary can let these clashing narratives speak in original phrasing: Arabic communiques, Israeli denials, French judicial language. The effect is not to settle the question. Most serious histories now treat Mossad's responsibility as highly likely but formally unacknowledged, but to show how targeted killings become stories fought over in public long after the operation itself has ended. Behind the public claims lies a quieter story of a double agent and a bugged office. In the years after the killing, French judge Jean-Louis Bruguière leads a long investigation into the case, tracing financial flows and travel patterns. One thread leads to Adnan Yassin, a PLO official accused of working as a double agent for Mossad. French and international reporting describe how Yassin allegedly provided detailed information on Psizo's movements in exchange for money and medical assistance for his wife. According to these sources, Yassin's relationship with Mossad's Tzomet recruitment unit also involved placing listening devices in the Tunis office of Mahmoud Abbas, then a senior PLO figure. One widely cited anecdote holds that an American mediator discovered a bug during a meeting, prompting scrutiny that would later expose Yassin's role. Tunisian authorities arrested him on 25 October 1993 and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. For the documentary, this chapter widens the lens from one street in Paris to the broader moral geography of espionage. The assassination of Psizo is no longer just about an old Munich list. It is also about the price of cooperation with Western services and the vulnerability of exiled leadership relying on hosts and intermediaries. In Tunis, Psizo's family and colleagues absorb the news. Official PLO statements frame him as a martyr and a professional dedicated to protecting lives. Israeli narratives, where they exist, continue to link him to past terrorism. The Jeep he bought, documented in German and French records, becomes a particularly stark symbol, an object meant to be a gift, now frozen as evidence in an assassination file. Even as peace talks gather pace, the logic of clandestine retribution continues, reshaping who is permitted to be a partner. In the broader chronology of Israeli-Palestinian violence, 8 June 1992 is a small marker, overshadowed by later accords and later wars. Yet in the specialist literature on Mossad's targeted killings, the assassination of Atef Psiso occupies a distinct place. It sits at the intersection of Operation Wrath of God's Long Shadow, the PLO's shift toward diplomacy, and Western intelligence agencies' quiet engagement with a former pariah. Some accounts treat the operation as a delayed Munich reprisal, emphasizing his alleged role in 1972 and the uncompromising stance of Shabtai Shavit. Others, including Robert Baer's retrospective analysis, view it primarily as a message to Western services, a warning that deepening cooperation with the PLO would have consequences. The historical record does not definitively resolve this tension. Instead, it shows how targeted killings can serve multiple, overlapping purposes: deterrence, revenge, domestic politics, interagency signaling, without any single, clean motive. On the human side, the cost is clearer. A family in Tunis loses a husband and father. European intelligence loses a channel that, by many accounts, had begun to provide useful information against violent groups. The shooters, if they resemble others described in Mossad histories, carry another silent operation home with them. Their work acknowledged only in closed-door briefings and encrypted cables, if at all. The documentary's final image returns to the place where it began, the forecourt of what is now the Pullman Paris Montparnasse, still at 19 Rue du Commandant René Mouchot. The traffic patterns changed, but the basic geometry intact. In an archival photograph, the spot where the car once stopped is just washed concrete. No plaque marks the event. Hotel brochures do not mention it. The revolving doors open and close for new guests, their luggage wheels ticking over the same ground. A slow shot of those doors from across the street, the sound of distant traffic, and an empty taxi bay where, for a few seconds in 1992, a liaison officer, a list of names, and a program of assassinations briefly occupied the exact same square of Parisian air before disappearing into competing archives and an ordinary, indifferent morning.